Dialogues.
Diálogos.
Dialogen.
Dialogs. Dialogi.
Dialoglar.
We are right now in Ars Electronica, 2017. The theme is AI, and I'm Refik Anadol, media artist, and currently exhibiting Archive Living project.
And I'm Kenric McDowell. I lead the Artist and Machine Intelligence program at Google Research.
So we have been collaborating in this purposeful project, and I guess personally one of the most favorite experience so far in the media art scene, thanks to fantastic collaboration, and otherwise it will never be in this scale of quality and feature forward thinking. So thanks a lot in the beginning.
Of course, yeah, thank you, Refik.
So one of the, I guess, wonderful part of the project was, first of all, SALT as an institution, which is a very purposeful one for the Turkey, and not only Turkey, probably in a globally thinking how archives have been sorted in a digital format, and their biggest concern, what happens if there is no physicality. And I guess our approach was kind of giving a one simple answer. Of course, there are many answers probably. But I personally really enjoyed the idea of completely bringing machine intelligence in the game. That was not anymore just a simple seeing this invisible data universe, but now it's kind of visible to the audience in an experiential way.
Yeah, I think you brought some new perceptions to the archive, right, that weren't necessarily there before. Like, for one, the perception of the totality. And I really liked that was something you shared when I just heard you talking about it, was that you worked with the researchers to find the right settings that reflected their knowledge of the archive's totality. So that, to me, seemed like an incredibly, I mean, you can say there's been TUSNI projects in the past and stuff like this, but the sense of doing that project with other people's kind of human understanding of the archive seems really important and novel. And the other thing that really stuck out to me, and I'm sure to everyone that viewed it, is the generative archive. Making the archive generative, I think, is a really novel thing here. And the idea of this sort of like unconscious of the archive, or the latent space of the archive, I'm speaking specifically about the hallucinations, that stuff is really feels very novel and important, in the sense that not only have you seen the totality of the archive sort of spatialized, but you've seen maybe the totality of the archive in its implicit elements, or its latent space, or its unconscious expression.
Completely, and especially that part is, again, without machine intelligence, we could be able to perceive the potential feature forward thinking of where archive can go. And by the way, in this, especially during the exhibition, like as you explained, so researchers were coming and looking at the patterns of those artifacts. And here in Ars Electronica, specifically, people from the field were much focused minds, are specifically enjoying the idea of being just go through a massive universe that is not anymore this biased horizontal or vertical world of devices every day we were get used to, this flat dimension versus your freedom of flying through that. That's very interesting feedback so far also came with the novelty of hallucinations. And
yeah, I mean, I'm curious about the sort of the longitudinal relationship with this interface, because one thing I've noticed is just, when you're in this festival setting and people are coming in, they're looking at it very quickly, and you're kind of just swirling through constantly. And that's certainly one of the most fun things to do, is just kind of like try to get your head around the totality and try to experience the totality. But I'm curious, from a more maybe practical standpoint, what the longitudinal experience is like for researchers or people that want to engage specifically with individual pieces of content or individual works that are in the archive. That I'm excited about seeing how that plays out.
That's a perfect point where art becomes a functional experience, which, I mean, in this case we already applied certain amount of intelligence that we already like aware of, like what are the connections between some certain aspects of the archive. And for example, in the VR version, we were like literally discussing recently, like now we have this sort of a Library of Babel inspired circular space that surrounds you with this information, versus what happens if there is no end and beginning. Like what happens if you just completely surrounded with this data infinitely. And because we're always, while researching, we have this simple light on our table, we have this most like the paper or pen or whatever digital tool we have. But what happens if we don't have those tools and we are completely in the void? And start with a simple noise pattern and then completely evolves an archive. And these are very much probably feature of libraries and archives to give us different insights.
Yeah, it's funny because the image that has come to me so many times thinking about and looking at that piece is the image of cyberspace that William Gibson creates in Neuromancer, and it has because the way it's described is a sort of totality of information. What you were just saying kind of reminds me of that, where you might have, I don't know, maybe there is some future incarnation of this project where you have one archive from one museum over here, and then you have another one over here, and another one over here, and you might actually be able to see the totality of that. Maybe it's not necessarily interesting, and maybe it's more useful to stay focused on one at a time, but there is an aspect of this project which is like large-scale information visualization and trying to like grasp patterns within those large-scale
completely
visuals.
Completely incredible journey there, another like a one. And I guess, so what I think overall the feedbacks were coming, like if the idea is an archive, a library, the purposeful, impactful part of a concept like really touches many people, instead of like, I mean, there are many wonderful examples of AI applied, image intelligence applied pieces here, which have been incredible experiments or beautiful results that are like how art started like previously in the very first cave handprints are very similar patterns applied to other new technologies. But when we maybe apply it in archive, it's kind of like the novel start of who we are. Like, I don't know, like there's a huge functionality comes with the experience, which is very exciting.
Well, an archive itself is already kind of one step removed from the individual thing. But that's, I think, also a really, I guess, fundamental aspect of machine learning, right? Because it's always in that similar archival space of being one step removed, and then to be an artist working with machine learning and with archives too, you're kind of, it's like they're both one step removed, and you're sort of like touching these things from a little bit farther away, and you're really more concerned with organization.
Definitely. Yeah. And this journey in the latent space, like one point, another point, another point, and it's like that ride itself in the minds of a machine. And it's an incredible collaborator. I don't know, like it's so powerful to have. I'm very optimistic again and again. I think we have an amazing potential here.
Well, yeah, and the conversation we were having the other day about, in terms of like future potentials, the conversation we were having about buildings kind of showing their own histories.
Yes.
But also not just showing them, but the possibility that this type of machine intelligence organization of the previous, history of a building could not only influence a reflection of that history, but also the structure of the building itself.
Completely.
Is super fascinating.
This is like one of the, I think, so the project inspiring many other institutions, not only like SALT only, the other archives are literally here, European commissions are coming, looking for like, what an inspiring idea for other institutions. So LA Philharmonic is one of those, like, and Frank as an architect was inspired by the idea of how archives can deeply connect it, not only with a surrounding, but also can be the entire totality of the architecture itself. So then the question, if we can make a simple four-corner walls dream, we can purposefully make an entire Disney hall, or like Gary's buildings dream too. With so that's just a another level of.
Well, and if you go beyond just the sort of media layer, right? If you go into the sort of mutable architecture or sort of things that have some sensors or some kind of ability to modify themselves, then maybe the building can actually dream of its own future in its own form, right?
That's like, there's another huge. Yeah, I think this field will definitely shake many fields. This idea will field many biased thinkers in the field. Like how quickly we can imagine a world that is maybe much better. I'm very optimistic thinking.
Do you want to talk about working with Mike?
Yes.
Taika? So what was it like to collaborate with Mike?
So as an artist, the knowledge that you can have is sometimes limited. Even though I'm a self-learned visual programmer, this field itself is a very rich and very deep and requires constant focused world of experience and methodologies, a very engineered, very analytical thinking as well. So one of the wonderful things that Mike Taika was literally giving an opportunity was how to think with the tools that is existing and explaining that very clearly and also giving. So I think because his artistic background was also helping him to explain probably, because he was saying like, okay, these are the algorithms we have on the table. Then it's like a menu level. Oh wow, this scene is interesting because it can define a space. It's not like the others. Like being able to see that without really reading all these papers and going through the very deep math versus like how to like quickly conceptualize the space in the brain, and those are very helpful. And secondly, I think he was very enthusiastic about touching this unique field of archives, and he also brings enormous intelligence to the table that are, I think, very unique, and thanks to that dedicated time of heavy working. So we were literally constantly sharing files every 3-4 days. He was training a neural net, and then the result was coming and sending a point cloud, and we were checking how it looks like sending to SALT people, and they were checking the connection point. It was an amazing collaboration, I think.
And that was distributed because you worked in person with Mike for a certain part of it, and then a lot of it was done online later, and then also with, I guess, people in Istanbul. Interesting.
And mostly our studio in Los Angeles was heavily getting all the vectors into the one space, and there we developed a custom software that runs the installation. But Mike was constantly the machine intelligence part was handled in a way that are optimized. That because it's like a 6 months of heavy production, so we had to be very efficient too.
I see. So you had you found a good flow and a good method to work in this complex way. Were you, one of the things you and your team really did was narrate the experience of the data, right? So the intro videos and like that's sort of that animation that really shows. I think it shows well like what's actually happening, even if you don't know a lot about machine intelligence, you're going to pick up what's going on. And the thing I think is really interesting about it is the fact that you use the actual data, because it's so often you see these types of interpretive visualization that when if I went in there not knowing that, I would assume it was just like it's supposed to be just like random stuff to make it look cool, but that's really the actual data that you use.
So that was really very important part, because as we know, media art scene is very much love depictions, very much loves abstractions of many concepts. But in this case, I found an incredible opportunity. Why do we need to abstract this? We have a real data points in space. We have real metadata from these amazing archivists. So why do we need to make it just beautiful, but how we can give a much more purposeful narration? So it was a good struggle, because we couldn't use easily those numbers. They require a lot of generative design thinking, algorithmic thinking to be able to put them in a noise field, and it was very complicated to create a story, but I think it was very rewarding, as you said, that people were at least getting kind of subconsciously, okay, I'll be soon seeing something that makes connection with all this narration, and it was really very fun to think.
And you and your team now that you've had this deep engagement with the process of doing machine learning research and work and understanding those data structures, have you incorporated any methods or ideas or concepts from the practice into your other projects?
So hopefully the upcoming ones are very inspiring. This one already, like as I said, like even the architect, like Frank Gehry, an architect that who revolutionized the thinking architecture through the custom software world, and coming back to his, I think, POV with this context is something represents very valuable thing. I guess we can start now, as you explained, not only planar world, we can simply think outside the screen, bring in things in 3D world, and apply much larger geometries in the physical world. I think it's literally scratch the surface. We just, I guess.
I'm curious, from my own experience doing curatorial work in this space and experiencing a lot of the work that's from generative neural net processes, and understanding some, to the extent that I do, the mathematical concepts underlying all of it, I have a strong perception that this multidimensionality in the translation of high-dimensional spaces down into perceptible dimensions has provided me with a sort of aesthetic appreciation of the complexity of things that we encounter in everyday life and the concepts that we use in everyday life, like this study I like to show in my talks that Blaze did, my director Blaze, everybody Arcas did, with gender representation and identification, and the ways that mapping people's responses to this survey, it can be done in very simplistic binaristic ways, it can be done in spectral ways, and it can be done in these high dimensional ways. And having seen that study and kind of absorbed some of the findings from it, I kind of found that multidimensional way of thinking has infiltrated my own experience. So I'm wondering, have you had any kind of correlated experience there, like being so immersed in a sensory way in a multidimensional space? Has your understanding of archives in general changed? Or?
Oh, yeah. So it's a wonderful point that, especially like how you explained the Blaze experiments and research approach was completely. It's a very small version of that I can say, because we were much more towards one point. But what was very very inspiring is I was literally in that archive 3 years ago without knowing the project. I was completely in a web browser. I was just humbly writing the most modest keywords that comes in my brain. And I was thinking, wow, what a amazing discovery in this flat world of browsing. Versus when the VR version, we were able to load the entire data set and freely flying through all these decisions. After seeing that universe, it's super hard to go back and it's almost impossible to reimagine how people are seeing big picture in a way that they think it's a big picture. That transformative, I think, experience in the machine learning part especially was insanely rewarding.
Have you looked at a piece in the installation and then found the physical piece in the archive?
Yes.
Yeah. Was there? I haven't had that experience, but I'm kind of curious because right now in my mind, when I think of that archive, I think of this big swirling thing, and I think of all that context, and then every time it's down to this one piece, and then there it is. And if I was to go look at the piece, I think it would be hard for me to separate all this context that I've added to it from the experience of archive dreaming.
Completely. And again, I'm not sure if it is a VR or AR or mixed reality, let's say. Most likely, because it's still, I think, beautiful to have a physical quality of something. In the virtual world, yes, we can depict that transformation between dimensions. But I guess still being aware of this biased physical quality of life, like a gravity or oxygen, still being aware of a life mixed with that life. It's very transhumanism concepts, but also very tomorrow, like next week level. It's not anymore I don't know, this sci-fi paragraph of a moment is literally next week. Like that.
Yeah.
That hope is so huge motivation.
Is there such a thing as a sort of informatic sublime? Like, meaning, could you touch the kind of void of interconnected, multidimensional totality in a way that might like have a psychological effect through these types of experiences?
I think so. I think we can completely. I don't know how much we can plan, but I think we can definitely. We can definitely put that ink in that water that has a beautiful journey based on the quality of the density of that environment.
Because it seems the more we understand, right, the more we understand about the context of things, but then the more we understand in depth, like what things are made of, the more difficult it is to actually apprehend like a single thing, right? Like,
completely.
Like the archive, I like was like what you were talking about with being in this flat space, and then now you have this totality, and then I was just imagining, like even every individual piece in that archive has its own unique history,
Yes.
And then to sort of engage with those on their own, and then go back to the totality. It's like that movement from scale to scale is like, I'm just talking about it, and I'm getting really overwhelmed.
It's I don't know. It's a very bright potential of tiny bit of seeing a universe that just was invisible a couple of months ago.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like we were talking about this dimension. So each image during the process was 256 pixels of like just bunch of light sources, let's say, or not light source. But then they had that new dimension that comes with the simple semantic connections that then now they become a different than a simple JPEG file.
Right.
And if that happens to that universe itself, with another archive comes, another context, another private or public, whatever archives. I mean, that chain reaction is exponentially hard to imagine, but yeah, I just dreaming about like the visual potential of that totality.
Do you think there's any possibility for addressing some of the geopolitical stress that we're experiencing right now? Projects like this?
I guess at the end, that's a very wonderful point, I guess. Where the archive is coming and who collected is one big question, and subjectivity of the collection, and it's something there. But I'm not 100% sure how geospatial thinking can be immediately solved if there's a major problem. I think it's a very researcher point of view, especially maybe anthropologic, maybe it's a very diverse, I think, group of researchers. Mind collaboration, maybe, but I think it gives you potential.
I mean, one of my personal, I guess, ways of thinking about AI projects like this is within a larger larger space of complexity in culture and civilization, right? So we're emerging in the 21st century. We have these kind of geopolitical stresses. We have, there's immigration that's being forced by climate change, that's causing extinction, that has something to do with our food sources and all these things. And so I'm thinking about like the WINDS projects that you're working on. And so you're an artist who's working in a space of visualizing and understanding complexity. So we have on the one hand a sort of historical way of doing that, but then you're also looking at this data. Do you see a connection between, for example, those two projects?
Wow, that's a one wonderful point actually. Completely, yes. So one of the reasons I think data-driven paintings or sculptures were completely the notion of numbness versus like what we perceive, what we never able to see in a big picture experience. And then one is a history that is already kept in a way that is curated or waiting to be curated or researched, but data itself that we produce or the nature itself produces are something much more objective, because it's just a wind, for example, a wind that just happened now without any bias or like it's a phenomena that just happens here with the probably most detached feeling of I don't know what else that comes in mind. But it's just a nature that a mother nature that we hopefully don't do anything, I guess. I don't know if people are manipulating the weather conditions, but assuming no, and then the purity of, I mean, what is the purest data in the world? Like the first big question. Like, what is the purest sensor in the world that can sense this physical to virtual world? Like those are like the questions where they started, but completely seeing the connection between the two universes. I mean, the more we sense, I guess, the reality through sensors, through machines, the more I guess we will find quicker answers. But again, the questions, if we don't ask the correct questions, answers are so limited, I guess.
One of the things that, well, I don't like to necessarily think of AI as like a sentient thing or something with consciousness necessarily. I think it's kind of a muddy way of approaching it. But one of the things that has come to mind at this festival with all the AI projects is, what are the senses that AI, if AI is a personified intelligence, just for the sake of a thought experiment, what would its senses be? Like what world does it actually see? So the idea of, you're saying about, maybe these kind of last unaltered aspects of life on Earth, like the natural elements, well, I guess we can say that they're unaltered, but like the things that are not directly altered with intent, like those data sources, showing that to whatever AI, that to me seems pretty important to add that sense data to the machine.
Completely. I definitely agree with that point, because of the, again, sensors are right now maybe for an airport that just figures out how to be accurate for the safety of a flight, most likely, or for us as human beings to be sheltered perfectly in terms of Katrina or very horrible stories that make the humankind pretty in terrible situations. But I mean, it happened, so we couldn't stop a moment, even though we had the most intelligent sensors or prediction engines. It came and it did that. So it will most likely be that, or in the seismic activities that beyond our control of. At this micro level, I guess, thinking a pixel inside an archive versus a moment in the universe that makes that pattern are all connected. So then why don't we look at micro and micro is, I guess, motivation.
Which is very much what this experience of archive dreaming is like. It's moving between the micro and the macro and finding scales of order, and very interesting.